They sold the house after I paid their $280,000 debt, but they didn't know the deed was in my name. My name is Kelsey Monroe, and I'm 29 years old. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house waiting for you. It was a dead silence, the kind that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. After a 16-hour shift at the hospital, all I wanted was to kick off my scrubs, collapse on the old floral sofa, and let the familiar sounds of my childhood home wash over me. The hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the pipes, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. But there was no clock. There was no hum. There was nothing. I pushed the front door open and my hospital bag slid from my shoulder, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. My breath caught in my throat. The living room was hollow. The floral sofa was gone. The coffee table, the bookshelves my dad built, the photos on the mantel, all of it had vanished. Sunlight streamed through the bare windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the empty space where my life used to be. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked slowly through the house, my footsteps echoing in a way they never had before. The dining room was empty. The kitchen was stripped. Even the curtains had been torn from the rods. It was like walking through a skeleton, the ghost of a home. They had taken everything, then I saw it, lying in the center of the living room floor, a single white business envelope. It looked small and insignificant in the vast emptiness. My name, Kelsey, was scrawled on the front in my mother's rushed handwriting. My hands trembled as I knelt and picked it up. It was thin, holding only a single folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. The note was short, brutally simple. "Thanks for fixing our credit, loser. We sold the house and moved to Florida with your brother. Don't call. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Loser." The word swam in front of my eyes. It felt like a punch to the stomach, knocking all the air out of my lungs. I read it again, and then a third time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't feel like the sharpest betrayal I had ever known. But they didn't change. I was on my knees in the middle of a gutted house, holding the proof that my entire life, my entire sacrifice, had been a joke to them, and I was completely, utterly alone. 6 months. It had only been 6 months, but sitting on that dusty floor, it felt like a lifetime ago. The memory began not with a bang, but with a vibration. My phone buzzing against a table in the hospital break room. I was slumped in a chair, spooning lukewarm yogurt into my mouth, my eyes gritty from staring at monitors and charts for 12 straight hours with 4 more to go. The name on the screen was Mom. My first instinct was a tired warmth, my second a prickle of anxiety. My family only called during my shifts if it was an emergency. "Mom, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice already tight with a nurse's instinct for disaster. The sound that came through the receiver wasn't words. It was a gasp, a ragged, ugly sob that tore through the sterile quiet of the break room. It was the sound of a world ending. "No, honey. Nothing is okay," she finally managed to choke out between breaths. "It's the house. We're going to lose the house. You have to come home, please. Your father, he can't even talk." The drive from the hospital to their house was a 20-minute blur of worst-case scenarios. My mind, trained to diagnose, raced through the possibilities. Had my dad's health taken a turn? Had there been a fire? The vagueness of her panic was a breeding ground for terror. I pictured the house of my childhood in flames. I pictured my father collapsed on the floor. I pushed my car 10 miles over the speed limit, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I pulled into the familiar driveway, the house was perfectly intact. No fire trucks, no ambulances. The calm exterior only made the atmosphere inside more jarring. I walked into a scene of meticulously staged despair. My mom sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and blotchy, a whole box of tissues in front of her. My dad stood by the window overlooking the backyard, his back to me, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. And Evan, my older brother, was perched on a stool, scrolling through his phone, radiating an aura of profound boredom. His presence was the most alarming thing in the room. Evan never showed up for a crisis unless he could somehow benefit from it. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Mom, you scared me to death." My dad turned around and the sight of his face shocked me. He was a man who had always been loud, confident, and in control. Now he looked hollowed out. His eyes were shadowed, his face gray with a shame so deep it seemed to age him by a decade. He couldn't look at me. He just slid a thick stack of envelopes across the table. They were all from the same bank, all plastered with bright red warnings. "Past due, final notice, foreclosure auction scheduled." He finally spoke, his voice a low rumble of humiliation. "It was some investments, Kels. A friend of a friend. Said it was a sure thing. A new tech company." I just needed some capital to get in on the ground floor. He explained how he'd taken out a second mortgage on the house, confident he could triple his money in a year. The tech company had gone bankrupt. He'd tried another investment, a can't-miss real estate deal, to recoup the losses, but that had fallen through too. He'd been chasing his losses for 2 years, digging the hole deeper and deeper, telling no one. Now the debt was a monster, an impossible sum of $280,000, and the bank was done waiting. They were taking the house. My mother began to speak, her voice trembling, weaving a tapestry of guilt and nostalgia. "This house, Kelsey, it was your grandmother's. She left it to us free and clear. We were supposed to do the same for you and Evan." She looked around the kitchen, her eyes landing on the faded height chart on the door frame. "You took your first steps in the living room. We brought you home from the hospital to this house. All our memories, they're inside these walls." She was selling me a storybook version of our family, a life I had always watched from the outside, but desperately wished I was a part of. She knew exactly which buttons to push. I looked at my brother, the silent, entitled prince. "What about Evan? Can't you help?" The question was pointless, but I had to ask it, just to hear the answer out loud. Evan finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "My credit is shot, Kels, you know that. Besides, I'm trying to get my own business off the ground. All my cash is tied up." His business was a vague idea about selling custom sneakers online that never seemed to progress beyond designing logos on his laptop. My dad just shook his head. "Evan's not in a position to help. He's had a rough go of it. A rough go of it that they had paid for every step of the way." The focus of the room, heavy and suffocating, settled on me. I was the last resort. The emergency glass to be broken. My dad walked over and put his hands on my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. His eyes were swimming with a desperate, pathetic plea. "You're the only one who can save us, Kelsey. You're the responsible one. Always have been. You have a good job, good credit. You're our only hope to save this family. Save the family." For my entire life, that had been my unspoken job description. I was the emotional and financial shock absorber. I was the one who smoothed things over, the one who never made waves, the one who quietly fixed the problems my brother and my father created. This was just the biggest, most expensive problem yet. A part of me, a cold, rational part, was screaming. It was screaming that this was a trap, that this was the culmination of a lifetime of being used. But another part of me, a much smaller, more foolish part, began to whisper. It whispered that maybe this time would be different. This wasn't just bailing Evan out of trouble or co-signing for a car. This was the home, the legacy. If I could do this, if I could perform this one, grand, impossible act of salvation, they would have to see me. They would have to be grateful. Maybe this was the price of admission into the family I'd always wanted. The price for their love was $280,000. The silence in the room stretched on, thick with their expectations. They were all watching me, waiting for me to say the words that would make their problems disappear. "Okay," I said, the sound barely audible. I cleared my throat and said it again, louder, as if to convince myself. "Okay, I'll do it." The explosion of relief was like a physical force. My mother let out a cry and launched herself at me, wrapping me in a hug that felt more like a desperate clutch for a life raft than a mother's embrace. "Oh, Kelsey, thank you. You're our hero! Our little hero!" My dad's face sagged with relief, the tension draining out of him. "We will pay you back every single penny," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear on my mother's grave." Evan even offered a rare, genuine smile. "Wow, Kels, you're actually doing it. Way to step up." The next 3 weeks were a systematic demolition of my own life. I started by going to my bank, the small local branch where the tellers knew my name. I sat with a personal banker and signed the forms to liquidate my entire life savings. The money I had meticulously saved since my first job at 16, the money that was supposed to be a down payment on a small condo of my own, vanished in a single transaction. The banker looked at me with concerned eyes. "Are you sure about this, Kelsey?" she asked softly. I just nodded, unable to speak. Next came the credit cards. I spent hours on the phone, navigating automated menus and talking to board representatives, requesting credit limit increases, and then taking out cash advances. The interest rates were criminal, and every transaction felt like another shackle being locked around my ankle. I was acting against every instinct I had, behaving with a recklessness that was completely foreign to my nature. The final and largest piece was the personal loan. I met with a loan officer, Mr. Harrison, a man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He laid out the terms in stark black-and-white reality. The monthly payments were staggering. The interest that would accrue over the life of the loan was more than the price of a luxury car. "Ms. Monroe," he said, his tone serious. "This is a life-altering amount of debt. I need to be sure you understand the commitment you are making." I looked at the paperwork, at the numbers that represented my own indentured servitude, and I thought of my mother calling me her hero. I thought of the look of relief on my dad's face. I thought of finally being seen. "I understand," I said, my voice betraying none of the terror I felt inside. I signed my name, my hand steady, and with that, my future was no longer my own. I brought the cashier's checks home and laid them on the kitchen table like a sacrificial offering. The celebration was immediate. They hugged me, they cried, they toasted me with cheap champagne. For a few weeks, I was their savior. My mom would call just to chat. My dad would ask for my opinion on the news. They promised me, again and again, that they would work out a repayment plan as soon as things settled down. I let myself live in that warm, golden bubble of appreciation. I ignored the fact that the repayment plan was never mentioned again. I ignored the way their calls became less frequent and then stopped altogether unless they needed a favor. I ignored every red flag because the alternative, admitting that I had just made the single biggest mistake of my life for people who felt entitled to my sacrifice, was too painful to contemplate. The lie they sold me was beautiful, and I bought it with everything I had. Growing up, our family had an unspoken set of rules. Rule 1, Evan's needs came first. Rule 2, Kelsey will figure it out. Rule 3, don't talk about the first 2 rules. This dynamic wasn't something that happened overnight. It was built brick by brick, year by year. 1,000 small choices that cemented our roles so firmly, I never thought to question them. The memory that stands out most clearly is the saga of the cars. Evan turned 16 and was handed the keys to a gleaming red convertible. It wasn't new, but it was flashy, and it was the center of his universe. He was obsessed with it. He washed it every weekend, drove it too fast, and used it to ferry around his legion of friends. My parents saw the car as a symbol of his popularity, his charm. I saw it as a 4-wheeled extension of his ego. I was 15, and my mode of transportation was a 10-speed bicycle I'd bought with my own babysitting money. The inevitable happened 3 months after his birthday. He called me from a payphone. This was before everyone had a cell phone, his voice shaky and high-pitched. "Kelsey, you have to come get me. Don't tell Mom and Dad. I messed up. Bad." He'd been showing off, trying to drift around a wet corner, and had introduced the front of his beloved convertible to a sturdy oak tree. I rode my bike 5 miles to the scene. The sight was absurd. Flashing police lights, the crumpled red metal of the car looking like a crushed soda can, and Evan standing there, trying to look remorseful for the police officer, while simultaneously looking cool for his friends who had gathered. He had a small cut on his forehead, which he was dabbing at dramatically. I had to talk to the officer, who was kind but firm, and then I had to figure out how to get Evan and his wounded pride home. The scene in our living room later that night was a masterclass in the family dynamic. My dad's face was a thundercloud. He paced back and forth, yelling about irresponsibility and the cost of insurance. Evan, seeing that anger wasn't working in his favor, switched tactics. The bravado vanished, replaced by tears. He talked about how scared he was, how the car had just gotten away from him, how he thought he was going to die. That's when my mom stepped in. She wrapped her arm around him, pulling him into a hug. "Oh, Charles, stop it," she said to my dad. "He's just a boy. He made a mistake. Can't you see how upset he is? The important thing is that our son is safe." The argument went on for an hour, but the outcome was predetermined. My dad's anger fizzled out, replaced by weary resignation. The focus shifted from Evan's recklessness to the problem of finding him a new car. Within 2 weeks, a newer, nicer, dark blue sedan was sitting in the driveway. My dad had co-signed another loan. Evan's consequence for totaling a car was an upgrade. A few weeks after the new car arrived, I came home from my part-time job at the public library, clutching a certificate in a cardboard frame. I had won a citywide essay contest. The prize was only $100, but it was the recognition that mattered. I had spent a month researching and writing, pouring my heart into it. I felt a rare and brilliant spark of pride. I walked into the kitchen where my parents were debating what kind of floor mats Evan needed for his new car. "Look what I got," I said, holding out the certificate. My dad took it and glanced at it. "An analysis of local waterway pollution. Huh, that's great, Kelsey. $100. Good for you." He handed it back and turned to my mom. "I think we should get the all-weather rubber ones. You know how careless he is with muddy shoes." My mom smiled vaguely at me. "That's wonderful, dear. Did you see the color of Evan's new car? It really brings out his eyes." I stood there for a moment, the certificate feeling heavy and stupid in my hands. My victory was abstract. It hadn't cost them anything, and it didn't require any action from them, so it barely registered. It was a non-event. I went up to my room and tacked the certificate to my bulletin board, but the joy had gone out of it. It was just a piece of paper. This pattern repeated itself, escalating through our college years. Evan's time at State University was an 18-month-long party, financed by my parents. When he inevitably flunked out, he came home not with shame, but with an air of sophisticated disappointment, as if the university had failed to live up to his standards. He also came home with a mountain of credit card debt. I accidentally saw one of his statements. It was a litany of bar tabs, pizza deliveries, and concert tickets. There was another family meeting. This one was quieter, filled with sighs and head shaking. But again, the conclusion was the same. They paid it off. "We have to get him back to zero," my dad had said, "so he can have a fresh start." Evan had an infinite supply of fresh starts. My own college journey was a solitary grind. When I showed them my acceptance letter to a top nursing program, their first reaction wasn't pride. It was anxiety about the cost. The conversation was short and excruciating. I had my spreadsheets and financial aid forms laid out on the table, showing them that with my scholarship and my savings, I just needed a little help to cover the gap. "Kelsey, we just can't," my dad said, not looking at me. "We're still paying for, well, for Evan's fresh start." "You're so resourceful," my mom added, her voice full of a placating warmth that made my skin crawl. "You've always been the sensible one. We know you'll figure it out." "Figure it out" became my mantra. I figured it out by working as a waitress until my feet were swollen and my back ached. I figured it out by taking on extra shifts as a hospital orderly, cleaning bedpans and changing linens. I figured it out by living in a tiny windowless dorm room and subsisting on a diet of ramen, free saltine crackers from the hospital cafeteria, and sheer willpower. I remember one particularly brutal week of finals. I hadn't slept for more than 3 hours a night. I was running on caffeine and stress, my brain feeling like a scrambled egg. I was at my absolute breaking point. I called home not to ask for money, but just for a moment of connection, for a word of encouragement. My mom answered, her voice distracted. "Kelsey, hi. Is everything okay?" "I'm in the middle of something." I started to cry, silent, hot tears of exhaustion rolling down my face. I'm so tired, Mom. I don't know if I can do this." "Oh, honey, don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice laced with impatience. "Everyone finds finals week hard. You're tough, you can handle it. Listen, I have to go. Your brother got a new puppy and he can't figure out how to assemble the crate, so your father and I are going over to help him. We'll talk later." She hung up. I sat there in the silence of my room, staring at my textbook. A puppy crate. My breakdown was an inconvenience. Evan's inability to follow instructions for a puppy crate was a family emergency that required both parents to be deployed. Even the small things, the constant tiny drains on my resources, added up. It was never just one thing. It was Evan calling me from the side of the road because he'd run out of gas again. It was my dad asking if I could spot him a couple $100s for a new set of golf clubs until his next paycheck. It was my mom borrowing my credit card to order something online because hers was maxed out. They were small enough requests that it felt petty to say no, but they created a constant, one-way flow of my resources directly into their lives. I was their safety net, their overdraft protection, their fixer. So when they came to me about the house, it was the logical conclusion of my entire life's training. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking me to perform the role I had been groomed for since childhood. And that foolish, hopeful part of my heart believed that if I played my part perfectly just one more time, on the grandest stage of all, the script would finally change. I thought I could fix our family. I didn't realize I was just the tool they were using to fix their own credit. The human mind has a strange way of protecting itself. In the first few minutes after reading the note, I didn't feel anything at all. It was as if my brain simply refused to process the words. I knelt on the floor, the paper trembling in my hand, and a profound, static-filled silence descended over me. It was more than quiet. It was the complete absence of thought, of feeling, of anything but the sight of the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. I might have stayed that way for an hour, or maybe it was only a minute. Time had lost all meaning. Slowly, sensation began to return, starting with the ache in my knees from the hard floor. I pushed myself up, my body feeling heavy and disconnected, like a machine I was operating from a great distance. I began a slow, methodical tour of the house. It wasn't a frantic search for answers. It was a quiet, dazed pilgrimage through the ruins of my own life. Each empty room was a fresh wound. I walked into my old bedroom first. The 4 indentations in the carpet where my bed had been for 20 years were like grave sites. They had even taken the bookshelf my grandfather had made for me, the one piece of furniture that held real sentimental value. I ran my hand along the wall where my desk used to be, the place where I had spent countless nights studying, writing, dreaming of a future I was now paying for them to have. A faint, sweet smell of the perfume I used to wear in high school still lingered in the closet. The scent was so familiar it was like a gut punch, a ghost of the naive girl who used to live here. From there, I moved to the living room. This was the heart of the home, the place of Christmases and movie nights. I could see it all so clearly. The lopsided Christmas tree we'd put in the corner by the window every year. My dad, asleep in his big, worn-out recliner, the TV droning on. My mom, curled up on the floral sofa, the one I had dreamed of collapsing onto, with a book in her lap. I stood in the middle of the room and saw all of them, happy, smiling apparitions. But the memories were tainted now, curdled. Had any of that been real? Or was it all a long, elaborate performance with me as the unwitting audience and financial backer? The kitchen was the worst. It was filled with the ghosts of 1,000 ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary in their cruelty. I could see my mom at the stove, making the spaghetti sauce whose recipe she had refused to write down, telling me I had to learn it by heart. I could see my dad at the table, loudly complaining about politics in the morning paper. I ran my finger over the deep scratch in the countertop, a permanent mark left from the time I'd tried to help Evan carve a pumpkin when we were kids, and the knife had slipped. Every inch of this house was a part of me, and they had carved it all out and sold it for parts. I was staring at the empty space where the refrigerator used to be when I saw her. Mrs. Gable, my sweet elderly next-door neighbor, was in her garden, tending to her prize-winning roses. She spotted me through the kitchen window and her face lit up with a kindly, wrinkled smile. She shuffled over to the low fence that separated our yards. "Kelsey, dear, I'm so glad I caught you," she called out, her voice thin but cheerful. "It all happened in such a whirlwind, I didn't get a chance to say a proper goodbye to your parents." I felt my own smile stretch across my face, a brittle, unnatural thing. Yes, it was all very quick. "Oh, your mother was just over the moon," Mrs. Gable chirped, snipping a dead leaf from a rosebush. She told me they found the most perfect place in a community down in Florida. Said it had a golf course for your father and a big swimming pool. She was so excited to finally be done with an old, drafty house. She said, "I can't wait to get rid of every last stick of this old furniture and start fresh." Can you imagine? So thrilling for them. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. Done with this old drafty house. The house they'd begged me to save. Get rid of every last stick of this old furniture. The furniture I had just paid off? The casualness of it, the sheer, unadulterated selfishness, was breathtaking. And the couple who bought the house seemed so lovely, she continued, oblivious to the fact that my world was collapsing behind my frozen smile. They were here yesterday with a contractor, talking about knocking down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room, making it all open plan. They have 2 little boys. It will be so nice to hear children laughing in that yard again. Strangers. Strangers were going to knock down the walls of my home, the home I now owed a fortune on. I had to get away before I either broke down or threw up. "That's so nice, Mrs. Gable. I have to go. A lot to do." I backed away from the window, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Once out of her sight, I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. The reality of it was sinking in, layer by painful layer. This wasn't a panicked flight. This was a meticulously planned operation. They had used me. They had played on my love, my sense of duty, my desperate need for their approval. They had watched me drain my savings, max out my credit, and chain myself to a mountain of debt. And they had been packing boxes the entire time. My hand fumbled for my phone. I had to hear their voices. I had to hear them try to explain this. I dialed my mom's number first. It rang once, then a cold, robotic voice announced, "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Panic clawed at my throat. I tried my dad's number. The same message. Disconnected. They had cut the lines. They had deliberately made themselves unreachable. With a trembling finger, I tried Evan. It rang, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he would answer. Then, his voice, slick and cheerful, filled my ear. "Hey, you've reached Evan." I'm probably busy living the dream. Leave a message. Living the dream. A wave of nausea washed over me. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The finality of it was absolute. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a conspiracy. My own family had conspired against me. The note wasn't a confession. It was a victory statement. "Thanks for fixing our credit, loser." The word echoed in the silent house. Loser. They had said it behind my back for years, probably, and now they had finally said it to my face. The numbness shattered, and a pain so sharp and visceral it felt like I'd been physically stabbed ripped through me. I curled into a ball on the kitchen floor, wrapping my arms around myself, and I finally began to cry. It wasn't a quiet, gentle weeping. It was a storm of raw, agonizing sobs that tore out of my throat, the kind of crying that leaves you empty and aching. They hadn't just taken my money and my home. They had taken my entire past and invalidated it. They had taken my present and destroyed it. And they had taken my future and sold it for a condo in Florida. The knife wasn't just in my back. They had left it there for me to find, with a note tied to the handle telling me what a fool I'd been. The sun went down, and the house grew cold. I didn't move from the floor for hours. The storm of sobbing eventually subsided, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. I was a shell. I felt nothing but the dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes and the chill of the floorboards seeping into my bones. Despair wasn't a blanket. It was a vacuum, sucking away all light, all hope, all possibility of a future. I thought about my debt. The number, $280,000, was so large it was abstract, meaningless. But then I broke it down. The monthly loan payment was more than my rent. The credit card interest was accruing daily. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick, and opened my banking app. I stared at the numbers. Savings, 47.18s. Checking, $212.55. Credit card 1, $15,000. Credit card 2, $12,500. And the new loan, a terrifying figure with a long string of zeros. My net worth wasn't just zero. It was deeply, catastrophically negative. I would be working for the rest of my life to pay for a house that now belonged to a family with 2 little boys. They would knock down walls and plant new flowers, and I would be sending a piece of my paycheck to the bank every month to pay for their open-plan kitchen. The sheer, staggering injustice of it was what kept circling in my mind. The cruelty. It was the note that I couldn't get past. The word loser. It wasn't enough for them to take everything. They had to mock me too. They had to make sure I knew they were laughing at me. The thought was so poisonous it made me feel sick again. I felt a surge of bleak, hopeless anger, but it had nowhere to go. It just churned inside me, burning me out. Sometime deep in the night, I moved. I forced my stiff limbs to carry me to the front porch, and I sat on the top step, wrapping my arms around my knees. The night was clear, and the sky was full of cold, indifferent stars. This was it. This was the bottom. I had nothing left. No family, no money, no home, no future. The thought of getting up and going to my shift at the hospital tomorrow seemed like an impossible task. How could I care for other people when my own life had been so thoroughly demolished? My purse was on the steps beside me, a dark lump in the gloom. I reached into it, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. My fingers brushed against a thick, smooth manila folder. The loan documents, the physical record of my own destruction. I pulled it out with a kind of morbid curiosity, a desire to look my own stupidity in the face. I couldn't read the documents in the dark, but I could feel their weight in my lap. And then, a memory, unsolicited and sharp, cut through the fog of my despair. It was a memory of a different room, a different day. It was Mr. Harrison's office at the bank. The room had smelled of coffee and old paper. He was leaning across his large, tidy desk, his expression kind but intensely serious. He had just confirmed that the funds had been transferred, that my parents' debt was cleared. "Kelsey," he had said, his voice low and steady, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have just assumed sole responsibility for a loan the size of a mortgage, but the asset, the house, is not in your name. From a legal and financial perspective, you are in an incredibly vulnerable position." I remembered my response. How naive it sounded now. "But they're my parents. They'll pay me back. They promised." Mr. Harrison had given me a small, sad smile. It was a smile that said he'd seen this story before. "I truly hope they do. But hope is not a legal strategy. This isn't about emotion, Kelsey. This is about business. You have made a business decision, a very risky one. My professional duty and my personal advice to you as a young woman with her whole life ahead of her is to protect your investment. The only way to do that is to have the title of the property transferred into your name." He explained the instrument, a quitclaim deed, a simple document where the current owners sign over their interest in a property to someone else. "You can tell them it's a requirement from the bank's legal department to secure the loan," he had suggested gently. "Frame it as a formality, a piece of paperwork we need for our files. In all likelihood, they won't think twice about it." I had hesitated. It felt deceptive, calculating. It felt like an admission that I didn't trust them, and I wasn't ready to make that admission. But Mr. Harrison's logic was a lifeline to the sensible, practical person I had always been. It wasn't a plot. It was insurance. It was what any smart person would do. And so, driven by my own deeply ingrained need to do things the right way, I had agreed. The scene that followed played out in my memory in vivid detail. A few days later, at the kitchen table, the very same table where they had begged me for help, I'd put the document in front of them. "The bank needs one last thing signed for their records," I'd said, my voice casual. They were in high spirits, giddy with their newfound freedom from debt. My mom was already looking at brochures for cruises online. My dad was on the phone with his brother, bragging that he'd weathered the storm. They barely glanced at the paper. They saw the dense legal text and their eyes glazed over. I pointed to the signature lines. "Right here and here," my dad signed with a flourish. My mom scribbled her name. I took the document to a notary the next day, and then I drove to the county courthouse and filed it with the clerk, who stamped it with a satisfying, official-sounding thud. In the whirlwind of everything that followed, the memory of that stamped document had been buried. Until now, sitting on the cold porch steps, the folder in my lap suddenly felt different. It was no longer just the record of my ruin. It might be the record of my salvation. A strange new feeling began to push through the heavy blanket of despair. It was a cold, sharp, and intensely focused thought. The house is mine. I scrambled inside, fumbling for a light switch. The sudden glare of the overhead light in the empty dining room was harsh, but I didn't care. I ripped open the folder and frantically shuffled through the papers. There it was, tucked behind the loan agreement. A crisp, clean copy. Quitclaim deed. And there, at the bottom, were their signatures. And in the top corner was the beautiful official stamp from the county clerk's office, dated and recorded. It was real. It was legal. It was done. They didn't know. In their rush to cash in and escape, in their arrogant belief that I was a fool they could easily discard, they had overlooked the single most important detail. They had sold a house that did not belong to them. The sale was a fraud. The money that was supposed to fund their Florida retirement was tied to an illegal transaction. I stood up straight, the paper clutched in my hand. The tears were gone. The despair was gone. The helpless victim was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone who had been pushed past her breaking point and had found solid ground on the other side. The emotion that filled me wasn't glee or a thirst for revenge. It was a cold, quiet, and absolute certainty. I walked over to my phone, picked it up, and set an alarm for 7 a.m. Then I opened a new note and made a list. Go to county records office. Get certified copies of the deed. Call a locksmith. Go to the hardware store. Buy new deadbolts. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had left me with nothing. They had no idea that they had just given me the one thing I never knew I needed: control. The house was mine, and my family was about to find that out, of course. I will now rewrite and expand the final parts of the story, 6, 7, 8, and 9, to the requested length of approximately 3,000 words each. The focus will be on adding significant depth, detail, and internal monologue to these crucial sections of Kelsey's journey from victim to survivor. I woke on the hard, unforgiving floor of the living room just as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the bare windows. Every muscle in my body ached, a deep physical protest against the stress and exhaustion. For a single terrifying moment, the reality of my situation washed over me again. The empty house, the staggering debt, the soul-crushing betrayal. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, threatening to keep me pinned to the floor forever. But then another thought, sharp and clear, cut through the despair. The deed. The memory of the stamped, notarized document wasn't a dream. It was a fact. A cold, hard, beautiful fact in a world that had become a chaotic nightmare. A new feeling, one I hadn't felt in years, began to uncurl in my gut. It wasn't happiness and it wasn't hope. It was resolve, a cold, clean, and potent resolve that felt like steel reinforcing my spine. I was done crying. I was done being the victim. Today, I was going to be a property owner. I pushed myself to my feet, my joints cracking. I couldn't face the day looking like the wreck I felt. The reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror was a stranger, a pale, haunted-looking woman with wild hair and eyes swollen from a night of tears. That was the Kelsey they had created, the loser from the note. I refused to be her today. I took a cold shower, the shock of the water a welcome jolt to my system, and scrubbed away the grime of the last 24 hours. I went to my car to retrieve my emergency duffel bag. Inside, beneath the spare scrubs, was the outfit I'd bought for my nursing school graduation interview. It was a simple pair of black slacks, a crisp white blouse and a charcoal gray blazer. I'd worn it only twice. Putting it on now felt like a transformation. The structured fabric of the blazer straightened my posture. The professional clothes were armor, a costume for the role I was about to play. Ms. Kelsey Monroe, a woman who understood her legal rights and was not to be trifled with. As I looked in the mirror again, the woman staring back was no longer a ghost. She was a stranger, yes, but one I wanted to get to know. She looked serious. She looked strong. The drive to the county courthouse was a study in forced calm. I kept my hand steady on the steering wheel, my breathing even. I rehearsed my lines in my head, planning the conversation with the clerk. I was preparing for a battle, and my weapons were going to be facts and documents, not tears and pleas. The world outside seemed oblivious, a sea of commuters lost in their own lives. A flicker of the old Kelsey, the dutiful daughter, surfaced for a moment, whispering doubts in my ear. "Are you sure about this? This will destroy them." I silenced it with a single word, spoken out loud in the quiet of my car. Loser. That word was my shield and my sword. It was the antidote to a lifetime of guilt. The county records office was exactly as I'd imagined. Quiet, orderly, and smelling of old paper, dust, and the faint, acidic scent of toner from the copy machines. People spoke in hushed tones. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. It was a place of facts, not feelings. I felt a sense of calm settle over me. This was my territory. I was a person who believed in rules, in order, in documentation. I walked to the counter and found myself in front of a woman with a brass nameplate that read, Brenda. She had a tired, seen-it-all expression and was methodically stamping a mountain of paperwork. She looked up at me, her gaze neutral. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, my voice coming out clearer and stronger than I expected. "I would like to request certified copies of a deed of ownership for a property." I gave her the address and my name. She turned to her computer, her fingers clicking on the keyboard with practiced speed. She squinted at the screen, murmuring to herself, "Okay, Willow Creek Lane, Monroe." Her eyebrows rose just a fraction of an inch. "I see a quitclaim deed filed on this property 6 months ago. Transfer from Charles and Mary Monroe to a Kelsey Monroe." She looked up, her professional mask slipping for a second as she sized me up. "Are you Kelsey Monroe?" "I am," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "All right then," she said, her expression returning to neutral. "Certified copies are $10 apiece. How many will you be needing?" "5, please," I said. The number felt right. It felt prepared. Brenda nodded and disappeared into a vast back room lined with shelves groaning under the weight of enormous binders. The 10 minutes she was gone felt like an eternity. My carefully constructed composure began to crack. Every doubt I'd ever had came rushing back. What if I'd misunderstood? What if there was a more recent filing? Another document that superseded mine? My family, for all their financial incompetence, had a cunning survival instinct. Maybe they'd found a loophole. I imagined Brenda returning with a sympathetic frown, telling me there had been a mistake, that the house was, in fact, not mine. The thought made my stomach clench. Just as my panic reached a crescendo, she returned, a folder in her hand. She laid 5 pristine documents on the counter between us. Each one was crisp, heavy paper, bearing a stunning embossed gold seal from the county and a wet ink signature from the clerk. They were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. "Here you go, Ms. Monroe," Brenda said. 5 certified copies. The property at 124 Willow Creek Lane is registered solely and entirely in your name as of the filing date. Everything appears to be in perfect order. I stared at the documents, at my name typed out in clear official letters. I ran my finger over the raised seal. It was real. "So," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "if, hypothetically, someone else, say, the previous owners, had attempted to sell the property recently," Brenda leaned forward slightly, and a flicker of something, interest, gossip, maybe even sympathy crossed her face. "Hypothetically," she said, lowering her voice, "that would be a world of trouble for them. It's called title fraud, and it's a felony. The moment a title search was run for a sale, this deed would pop up and everything would grind to a halt. The sale would be legally void. Any money that had been exchanged, from the buyers, from a mortgage company, would be seized and frozen in an escrow account by the title insurance underwriter. They don't mess around with fraud. There would be an investigation, a criminal one, void, frozen, felony. The words were anchors, securing me in this new reality. The power I felt wasn't a dizzying rush. It was a slow, deep seismic shift. The tectonic plates of my life were realigning. I was no longer the foolish, sentimental girl who could be tricked and discarded. I was the legal owner of a valuable asset. I was the one holding the stamped certified proof. I carefully placed the documents into my own folder, my hands as steady as a surgeon's. I paid the $50 in cash. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, meeting her eyes. "You have no idea how much you've helped me." She gave me a small, knowing smile. "Good luck, Ms. Monroe," she said. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, indifferent sunshine. But it didn't feel indifferent anymore. It felt warm. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a full 5 minutes, just holding the folder in my lap. I read the deed again, tracing the legal language with my finger. It was a shield. It was a weapon. It was the truth. My next stop was not the house. I looked up 24-hour locksmiths on my phone and called the first number. A gruff voice answered. "Locksmith, this is Gus." "Hello, Gus," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "My name is Kelsey Monroe. I need every lock changed on my house as soon as possible." "Moving in?" he asked. "Taking possession," I corrected. "I can be there in 20 minutes. "You the owner?" he grunted. "Gotta see ID and proof of ownership." A utility bill, a deed, something like that. A smile, the first genuine smile in what felt like a lifetime, touched my lips. "That won't be a problem," I said. "I have 5 certified copies of the deed right here with me." Waiting on the front porch for Gus to arrive, I felt like a sentry guarding a fortress. When he pulled up in his van, he was exactly as I'd pictured. A big, no-nonsense man with grease on his hands. He barely glanced at me as I showed him the deed and my driver's license. He just grunted, "Yep, that'll do," and got to work. The sound of his drill biting into the old locks was the sound of my liberation. It was a loud, violent, and deeply satisfying noise. He worked quickly, and within an hour he was done. He handed me a small metal ring with 4 shiny new keys on it. "All set, miss," he said, handing me the bill. I paid him, and as he was about to leave, he paused. "You know," he said, looking at the empty house and then back at me, "I change the locks on this house about every 5 years. People come, people go. Just remember, whoever holds the key is the one who gets to decide who comes in." He nodded once and drove away. I stood alone on my porch, the new keys feeling heavy and real in my palm. I walked to my front door, selected one of the keys, and slid it into the brand new lock. It turned with a smooth, decisive click. It was the sound of a door closing on the past and a new one opening to a future that I and I alone would control. For the first few hours, the only sound in the house was my own breathing. The new locks had transformed the space. It was no longer just an empty house. It was a secure fortress. My fortress. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm I knew was gathering on the horizon. I walked through the rooms, not as a ghost haunting the past, but as a surveyor planning the future. I ran my hand along a wall in the dining room and thought, I'll paint this a dark, comforting blue. In the kitchen, I imagined where a small table for 2 might go. I was furnishing a life for myself, a life that had no room for them. The quiet was a canvas, and I was slowly, deliberately, planning my first brushstrokes. I was so lost in my thoughts that when the phone finally rang, the sound was a violent intrusion. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I answered, my voice a calm, neutral. "Hello? Yes, may I speak with Ms. Kelsey Monroe?" The voice was female, professional, and strained. "This is she. Ms. Monroe, my name is Sharon Miller. I'm a senior agent with the Coastal Title Insurance Company. We are handling the escrow for the sale of 124 Willow Creek Lane, and a major issue has just come to our attention." "I'm aware of the issue," I said, my voice even. There was a pause. "You are? We've just received a red flag on the title search. It appears the deed was transferred into your name via a quitclaim 6 months ago, making you the sole legal owner. The sellers of record, Charles and Mary Monroe, had no legal standing to sell the property." "That is correct," I said. The words felt clean and powerful. "So, to be absolutely clear," Sharon said, her voice tight with the stress of unwinding a fraudulent transaction, "you are not authorizing this sale?" "That is correct. The property was never for sale. I am the owner, and I have no intention of selling. Any funds that were transferred from the buyers or their lender were done so under false pretenses." "It was fraud." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Fraud," she repeated, the word sounding like a curse. "I was afraid of that. Ms. Monroe, I need you to know we are taking this very seriously. The funds in the escrow account have been frozen, effective immediately. We are notifying the buyers, their lender, and the authorities. This is now a criminal matter." "Thank you for letting me know, Sharon," I said, as if she were confirming a dental appointment. "I have certified copies of the deed if you need them for your investigation." "We will," she said, sounding both horrified and grateful. "We will be in touch." She hung up and I smiled. The first domino had not just fallen, it had been flicked with decisive force. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and waited. The next call, less than an hour later, was from Evan. His name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened. This was the true test. Sharon was a professional dealing with a legal problem. Evan was a spoiled man-child whose candy had just been snatched away, I answered. What did you do? His voice was a raw, primal scream of rage. It was the sound of pure entitlement being denied for the first time. Hello, Evan, I said, my voice a placid lake against his hurricane. Don't you dare hello Evan me, he roared. The money is gone, vanished. Sharon from the title company just called Dad, yelling about fraud. The bank account is frozen. What the hell did you do, Kelsey? I established my legal ownership of my own property, I said, each word chosen with deliberate calm. The house is in my name. They had no right to sell it. It's not your property, he shrieked, his voice cracking. It's the family home. Mom and Dad just signed some stupid bank papers you put in front of them. You tricked them. You set them up. They are adults who signed a legal document transferring ownership of a house in exchange for me taking on their $250,000 debt, I replied, my voice unwavering. It's called a consequence. You should look it up. You selfish bitch, he spat, his words dripping with a venom that had been simmering for years. You've always been this way. Jealous of me, of everything Mom and Dad gave me. You couldn't stand to see us happy, so you had to ruin it. This was our fresh start. Ours. The sheer audacity of it, the hour that was funded entirely by my life, was so staggering it was almost funny. My only role in your fresh start was to be the bank, Evan, I said. And the bank is officially closed. You will regret this, he seethed. You're going to end up a miserable, lonely old woman, and it's what you deserve. Goodbye, Evan, I said, and pressed the end call button. My hand was trembling, but not from fear. It was from the adrenaline of a battle I had just won. The next call was my mother's. Her approach was textbook. It started with a heart-wrenching sob. Kelsey, honey? Oh, Kelsey, what is happening? The performance was so transparent I could almost see the stage directions. Enter mother weeping. What do you want, Mom? I asked. There's been a mistake. A terrible misunderstanding, she cried. Some people are saying we did something illegal. That's not true. We would never. You have to call them, Kelsey. You have to tell them it's all okay. Your father... Oh God, your father is a mess. He's having chest pains, he can't breathe. This stress is going to kill him. How could you do this to your own family? There it was, the ultimate weapon in her arsenal, my father's health. It had worked on me 1,000 times before. A wave of the old conditioned guilt washed over me. But this time, another wave, stronger and colder, washed it away, the memory of her handwriting on the note. There is no misunderstanding, I said, my voice hard. You understood perfectly what you were doing when you packed up the house while telling me I was your hero. You understood when you changed your phone numbers. And you understood when you wrote me that note. The note was a stupid, silly thing, she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. Evan wrote that. We were all just so stressed and not thinking clearly. We were going to pay you back, I swear we were. We just needed to get away to have a new beginning. You've destroyed your father's last dream of a peaceful retirement. You want to talk about destroyed dreams, Mom? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Let's talk about my dream of owning my own home. My dream of being financially stable. My dream of having a family that didn't see me as a walking, talking ATM. You didn't just take the money. You took everything. And now you're upset because there are consequences. But we're your family, she wailed. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was a loser you could discard, I said. The house is mine. The sale is fraud. There is nothing left to discuss. I ended the call, my heart aching not for her, but for the daughter who had spent 29 years desperately trying to earn the love of this manipulative, selfish woman. My father was the last to call. He waited a full day, a silence that was more menacing than Evan's rage or my mother's tears. When he finally called, his voice was low and cold, the voice he used when he was about to deliver a verdict. Kelsey, you will stop this foolishness immediately. There's nothing to stop, I replied. It's already done. Don't you take that tone with me, he snarled. I don't know what kind of pathetic little power trip you're on, but you need to remember your place. I am your father, and that is my house. I will hire the best lawyers in Florida, and I will drag you through a court system that will strip you of everything. This is elder abuse. This is theft. No, Dad, I said, my voice chillingly calm. This is contract law. You can't steal something that was legally signed over to you. I have the quitclaim deed, the one you and Mom signed. It's been filed with the county for 6 months. It is a legally unassailable document. Your lawyers will tell you that, after they've charged you a retainer you can't afford. The silence on the other end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a bully's bluster deflating, of a king realizing he was naked. He was powerless and he knew it. The cold fury in his voice dissolved, replaced by a desperate wheezing gasp. Why? He finally whispered, the word pathetic and small. Why would you do this to us? You should have thought about that before you called me a loser, I said, and I hung up the phone. A few days later, my Uncle Brian called. He sounded exhausted. He'd been appointed by default as the family's crisis manager. I told him the entire unvarnished truth, texting him a photo of the note as evidence. He was quiet for a long time. Good Lord, Kelsey, he finally said. I am so sorry. He proceeded to paint a grim picture of their implosion. Their dream condo in Florida was gone, along with their hefty deposit. The buyers of my house, a young family with 2 kids who had already sold their previous home, were now living in a hotel and had hired a lawyer who was using words like punitive damages. The bank had frozen every penny from the fraudulent sale. My parents and Evan were staying in a grimy roadside motel, arguing constantly and watching their small amount of cash dwindle. And Evan's wife, Sarah? I asked. Left him, Brian said with a heavy sigh. Packed her bags the day she found out. Apparently, Evan showed her the note, trying to paint you as the villain, and it backfired spectacularly. She told him she was done with the whole parasitic Monroe clan. Evan's driving back to town now. He has nowhere else to go. Their entire world had been a fantasy, constructed with my money and held together by lies. I had done nothing more than hold up a mirror, and the reflection had shattered them. My revenge was not an act of passion. It was an act of administration. It was the quiet, methodical, and deeply personal process of purging my home of their presence. The day after the barrage of phone calls, a profound quiet settled over the house, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the silence of a space still occupied by ghosts, by the lingering energy of the people who had betrayed me there. I knew I couldn't start my new life until I had performed a final, thorough exorcism. I drove to a big box store and filled a cart with the tools of my silent revenge. 20 large cardboard boxes, 5 rolls of heavy-duty packing tape, and a pack of thick black markers. The cashier gave me a friendly smile. Looks like someone's moving, she said. Yes, I replied, a small secret smile on my own face. Someone is. The task I set for myself was to pack away every single item they had left behind. They had taken the things with obvious resale value, but they had left the sediment of their lives, the personal clutter that was too much trouble to move. I decided to work from the top down, starting in the hot, stuffy attic. The attic was a museum of obsolescence. Boxes of Evan's childhood toys, expensive action figures, and Lego sets he had broken or grown bored of. My mother's abandoned craft projects, half-finished quilts and dried-up oil paints. My father's collection of old vinyl records he never listened to. As I packed, I wasn't just clearing a space. I was analyzing the evidence. I saw my mother's inability to finish anything she started. I saw my father's tendency to accumulate things for a romanticized version of himself that didn't exist. I saw most clearly the river of expensive toys that had flowed into Evan's life, a constant stream of appeasement for a boy who was never satisfied. My own small box of childhood treasures was tucked away in a corner, modest and untouched. I left it where it was. It was the only thing that belonged here. The most difficult part was my parents' bedroom. Their scents still lingered in the closet. My dad's woodsy aftershave and my mom's floral perfume. It was an intimate space, and clearing it felt like a profound violation, but a necessary one. I found my mother's wedding dress stored in a large cardboard box. The silk had yellowed over the years. It was supposed to be a symbol of love and commitment, but all I saw was a costume for a part she had played. I carefully folded it and laid it in a new, clean box. I found my dad's old military dress uniform. He had only been in the service for a few years, but he talked about it as if he were a general, polishing the brass buttons and telling embellished stories of his time in basic training. It was another costume for another role he played. I packed it away. Then came the photo albums. I sat on the floor, surrounded by 3 decades of documented lies. There we were, smiling at Disneyland. I remembered the truth of that trip. The blistering heat, Evan's whining, and the argument my parents had in the hotel room that night. Here we were, smiling on a Christmas morning. I remembered the truth of that day. The deep disappointment I felt when Evan received a new gaming system, and I received a practical sweater, and my mother telling me to be more grateful. I looked at the photos of myself, a little girl with a forced smile, and I felt an overwhelming urge to reach into the past and protect her, to tell her that none of this was her fault, that she was worthy of love, even if these people were incapable of giving it. I didn't linger. I closed each album, sealed it in a box, and labeled it with the black marker, Memories. The word looked stark and clinical. The process took 3 full days. I worked until my muscles ached and my hands were raw from the cardboard and tape. I didn't listen to music. I just worked in the silence, my actions a moving meditation. With every box I taped shut, I felt a weight lifting. I was containing their chaos. I was compartmentalizing my past. The house, in turn, began to breathe. The air felt cleaner, lighter. I was reclaiming the space, not just legally, but energetically. When I was done, 21 boxes stood in neat uniform stacks in the living room. It was a monument to a life that was no longer mine. I called my Uncle Brian. "It's done," I said. "I've packed everything. Can I bring it over?" He sighed, the sound heavy with the burden of being the family's last bridge. "Kelsey, are you sure? Your mom is a wreck." "This is the only way I can move forward," I said. "I just want it gone." He reluctantly agreed to let me drop the boxes on his lawn. He didn't want a confrontation at his house, but he understood I had nowhere else to take them. I rented a small U-Haul van. Loading the boxes myself was a struggle, each one a heavy burden. But as I slid the last one into the back and pulled down the rolling door, the sound was a thunderclap of finality. The drive to my uncle's house was the last journey of my old life. I knew somehow that they would be there. They wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity for one last dramatic scene. Sure enough, as I pulled onto his street, I saw their car, a rental parked at the curb. My stomach clenched, but I took a deep breath. I was not the same person who had trembled before them in the kitchen months ago. I parked the van and got out. As if on cue, the front door of my uncle's house opened and they emerged onto the porch. My father, his face pale and drawn, my mother, her eyes red and swollen, and Evan, radiating a sullen, resentful energy. They looked like refugees, lost and bewildered. I ignored them. I opened the back of the van and began my work. I grabbed the first box, kitchenware, and carried it to the edge of the lawn. I set it down gently. I went back for the next one. And the next? I moved with a steady, unhurried rhythm, a one-woman moving company exercising her own demons. They stood on the porch, a silent, watching tribunal. I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel my mother's desperate hope for a sign of weakness, my father's simmering anger, Evan's petty hatred. I gave them nothing. When I carried the very last box, the one labeled Memories, and placed it on top of the pile, my dad finally broke his silence. He walked down the steps and approached me, his hands held out in a gesture that was half plea, half command. "Kelsey, enough of this," he said, his voice a hoarse croak. "This has gone on long enough. We need to sit down and talk this through." He reached for the box, as if he had the right to it, as if he could just take back the past. I took a single step back, out of his reach. I looked from his hand to his face, a face I had once tried so desperately to please. All the power he once held over me was gone. I felt no fear, no anger, only a vast, empty pity. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a negotiation. I met his gaze, and the words came to me, simple and profound. They were the key that unlocked everything. I spoke them not with malice, but with the calm, unshakable clarity of a final truth. "You should have just said thank you." His face, which had been set in a mask of paternal authority, simply crumpled. It was as if I had reached inside him and pulled out his spine. My mother let out a choked sob. Evan looked away, unable to meet my eyes. In that moment, they understood. They understood that this wasn't about the money or the house. It was about a lifetime of taking, a lifetime of disrespect, a lifetime of ingratitude. I didn't wait for them to respond. Their apologies, if they ever came, would be worthless now. Their anger was impotent. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on them, on the pathetic monument of boxes on the lawn that contained their history, and I walked away. I got into the driver's seat of the empty van, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. I did not look back. The drive away from my uncle's house was the beginning. The empty van felt cavernous, a hollow space that echoed the new emptiness in my life, an emptiness that for the first time felt like freedom, not loss. When I walked back into my house, the silence was different. The ghosts were gone. The air was clean. The space was finally, truly mine. But in the first few days, the quiet was also deafening. The adrenaline of the confrontation faded, leaving behind a profound sense of solitude. I was completely and utterly alone. For my entire life, my family had been the chaotic, dysfunctional sun around which my world orbited. I had pushed my planet out of its orbit, and now I was just floating. A part of me, the part trained for crisis, kept waiting for the phone to ring, for another emergency to solve, but it never did. I had to learn to live in the quiet. I had to learn to be the center of my own universe. This new life wasn't built in a day. It was built slowly, deliberately, with small conscious acts of reclamation. It started with the walls. I couldn't stand to live within the pale, apologetic pink of my old bedroom a moment longer. I went to the hardware store and spent an entire afternoon staring at paint swatches. I didn't think about what would improve resale value or what my mother would have called tasteful. I chose a color for myself, a deep, moody, sage green that reminded me of a forest after it rains. Painting the room was a physical ritual of transformation. I put on old clothes, cranked up a playlist of music they would have hated, and I worked for 2 straight days. The physical exertion was a release. The scraping of old paint, the smooth glide of the roller, the clean, sharp smell of the new color. It was all part of the process of overwriting the past. I wasn't just covering a color. I was erasing a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. When I was finished, I didn't have a bed, so I threw my mattress on the floor, curled up under a blanket, and fell asleep feeling a sense of ownership I had never known. Next, I took on the yard. My mother's prized roses were a constant source of labor and anxiety for her. They were beautiful but fragile, demanding constant attention. They were, I realized, the perfect metaphor for her. One Saturday, I put on a pair of thick gloves, and with a grim sense of purpose, I dug every single one of them up. I gave them to Mrs. Gable next door, who was thrilled. In their place, I began to cultivate a garden that reflected my new life. I planted things that were hardy and useful. A sprawling rosemary bush for remembrance, clumps of lavender for peace, resilient coneflowers and black-eyed Susans that would thrive on their own and feed the bees. My garden wasn't for show. It was for living. It was a space that gave back more than it took, a place of resilience and quiet growth. The house itself came together slowly, piece by piece, dictated by the reality of my finances. The mortgage, which was really my old loan repurposed, was a heavy burden, and I picked up every extra shift I could at the hospital. I was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the ache of building something for myself. I had no money for new furniture, so I became a regular at local thrift stores and flea markets. I found a perfectly worn-in leather armchair for my dad's old office, which I was now calling the library. I bought a sturdy, slightly scratched dining table and spent a weekend sanding it down and refinishing it. Each piece I brought into the house was chosen by me, repaired by me, and loved by me. The house was no longer a collection of their hand-me-downs. It was a curated reflection of my own story. I knew I couldn't build this new life entirely on my own. The solitude, while peaceful, could easily curdle into loneliness. I made a conscious effort to rebuild my social world, which had atrophied under the weight of my family's constant needs. I reached out to 2 old friends from nursing school whom I had neglected. I invited them over for dinner, feeling a pang of embarrassment at my sparsely furnished home. I didn't need to worry. We sat on the floor in the living room, eating pizza out of the box and drinking cheap wine, and we laughed until our sides hurt. The easy, unconditional acceptance of their friendship was a balm on my wounded soul. It was a powerful reminder that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who respect you, who make you feel seen. There were still echoes of the old life. I received a formal letter from the lawyer of the couple who had tried to buy the house, informing me of their lawsuit against my parents. I forwarded it to my uncle with a note that said, "Not my problem," and heard nothing more. I received a few more desperate, rambling texts from my mother before I finally took a deep breath and blocked her number. Then I blocked my father. Then I blocked Evan. Each block was a small, decisive click, a digital door being locked forever. The silence that followed was absolute. One Tuesday night, about a year after my world had imploded, I came home after a grueling 12-hour shift. I was bone-tired. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down in the armchair in the library. The house was quiet. It was the deep, comforting quiet of a safe harbor. Through the window, I could see the lavender bushes swaying in the evening breeze. The sage-green walls of the room felt like an embrace. I looked around at this space, at this life I had built from the ashes of another, and a feeling of profound peace settled over me. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-ending moment. It was just a quiet Tuesday. But in that quiet, I realized I was happy. I wasn't waiting for a crisis. I wasn't dreading a phone call. I wasn't working to pay off someone else's mistakes. I was just living. I had survived. I had rebuilt, and I had done it all on my own terms. The best revenge wasn't seeing them fail. The best revenge was my own, quiet, unassailable peace. They thought they destroyed me. They took my money, my trust, and my past, and left me for dead. But I didn't need revenge. I just stopped saving them. Peace, I've learned, is not something you're given. It's something you build. One painted wall, one planted flower, one blocked number at a time. Have you ever been betrayed by family after giving them everything? Share your story in the comments. I want you to know you're not alone. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe peace is the best revenge.